You hear a lot today about citizenship, particularly as it relates to the ongoing debate about immigration reform. Now, it's not my purpose here this morning to weigh in on that topic, but it is safe to say that we as a nation wouldn't be having all this debate if citizenship weren't important. It is important. It tells us who we are and who we belong to. It carries with it both rights and responsibilities. As citizens, we have the right to vote. But with that right comes the responsibility to be informed about the issues of the day. We have the right to be tried by a jury of our peers and to due process of law. But with that right comes the responsibility to obey and to respect the law, and to serve on a jury if called. We have the right to freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly. But with these rights come the responsibility to exercise them in a way that is respectful of the rights of others. Being a citizen challenges us to strive not just to be citizens, but to be good citizens. St. Paul, in his letter to the Philippians, tells us that our citizenship is in heaven. Our heavenly citizenship, however, is not so much defined in terms of rights. Our heavenly citizenship is more about relationships. Relationships with God and relationship with each other. Now, those relationships do carry with them some responsibilities. And if we strive to be good citizens of our heavenly country, we will take those relationship responsibilities seriously. During this Lenten season, we are called to re-examine those relationships and to see just how well we have lived up to the responsibilities which come from them. And where we have failed to live up to our responsibilities, well, we have a word for that. We call it sin. Now, sin can be defined in a number of different ways. It can be active or it can be passive. As we say in the confession, we can sin by what we do and by what we leave undone. Sin is the failure to live up to the baptismal covenant. It is the violation of the commandments and the laws of God. But since the whole basis of God's commandments and laws is love, sin can also be defined as the failure to have loved enough. Now, we could spend a whole lot of time railing about sin and exhorting each other not to sin. And that is what some think that Lent should be all about. But that isn't really the answer to the problem of sin. Father Rob Boyle, the director of the Clergy Leadership Institute, wrote a column in which he answered the following question: what do we do about sin? And I'd like to share part of what he wrote with you. Father Rob said, "My basic answer is that I think sin is a bad thing. However, focusing on stopping sin is usually ineffective, as St. Paul in his epistle to the Romans graphically portrays. The harder he tries to stop sinning, the worse it gets. Sin's only power is to keep you sinning. He will also keep you miserable. Notice how utterly useless guilt is in stopping you sinning. We feel guilty after we do something, not before we do it. Since it comes after the action, it won't stop us from doing the thing we now feel guilty of. Making someone feel guilty won't change the past. It will keep you trapped in doing what you feel guilty about. Alcoholics know this all too well. They feel guilty about drinking, and they know that for a brief moment they can assuage that guilt by drinking. This is St. Paul's vicious conundrum. The answer to sin is not less sin. It is to grow in grace and love. In the pure light of grace, you are free to sin and free not to sin. And it is in that light that sin becomes uninteresting and loses its power. The answer to sin and the purpose of Lent is not a negative thing. It is, as Father Boyle says, not about less sin. It is about more grace and more love. It is not about less death. It is about more life. And there is no life in what we say no to. There is only life in what we say yes to. In our lesson from the book of Genesis this morning, Abram said yes to God. He believed God's promise, though he certainly didn't understand it. And the Lord reckoned it to him as righteousness. Abram said yes to faith and to trust in God. And from that yes, an unbreakable covenant was formed. And Abram, later Abraham, did become the father of a great people. If our Lent is only a time of denial, it will be a time of death. On the other hand, if we say no to some temporal distraction, to grace and to love, then that little no can open a window to a profound yes. Getting to that profound yes is what Lent is all about. By virtue of the profound yes of our baptism, we are not a negative people. We are an overwhelmingly positive people. And our God is an overwhelmingly positive and life-giving God who calls us to live in the world, to exercise our heavenly citizenship by saying yes. Yes to the example set by Jesus. In today's lesson from Luke's Gospel, Jesus refused to be drawn into a negative, counterproductive confrontation with Herod. He was much too busy doing life-giving work, the work of healing and casting out evil. Lent invites us not only to say no to sin and to death, but to look for opportunities to say yes to life and growth in our faith in God's purpose for us, in our loving service of God and of our neighbors, and in our hope in His promises as we grow into the fullness of our heavenly citizenship. To Him who first said yes to us be all honor and glory, now and forever. Amen.